Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. Today, before we get started, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who wished me well on my transition from living in San Diego, moving to Sydney, and the people who were so excited about the podcast coming back on air for 2021. It's been really encouraging and exciting to hear from you and how excited you are to see where we're taking things in 2021. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about breaking the mold in coffee. What do I mean by breaking the mold in coffee? Well, it's been almost 12 months since the pandemic really hit worldwide. We're about a month away from that. And one thing that we saw in our industry particularly is that all of our vulnerabilities were exposed. And it's my belief that the vulnerabilities occurred in the first place because we as an industry were complacent. And we were complacent because a model that worked in the 90s or the early 2000s seemed to be a model for doing coffee that we have stuck with when it comes to businesses and careers and supply chain practices. And we've stuck with that over the decades. 2020 exposed all the vulnerabilities in that and offered us all the opportunity to reassess what is it that we want to be doing in coffee. Do we still want to be here or do we want to move on? And if we want to be here, how can we do coffee the best to our ability as business owners and professionals? So not just with regards to brewing and roasting coffee and the craft of it, but more so the deliverable with regards to the business and professionalism aspect of that. I have, through the coaching that I've been doing in the coffee industry across the pandemic and having now been in Sydney for over a month, I can tell you that different cultures around the world are experiencing this pandemic in very different ways. And the different ways that they have been experiencing them has led different people within those cultures to adapt and pivot in different ways. Now, an example of that is in the United States, as the pandemic has continued to progress, you have noticed that from the beginning of the pandemic, businesses that were operating as what we call zombie businesses were the first businesses to close. These are businesses who were operating profit and loss statements that were operating insolvent and they weren't aware of it. So that was that they were running at a loss for a long period of time. Essentially, the businesses were like the walking dead, which is why they call them zombie businesses. And so as the pandemic continued to move on, and zombie businesses closed, you found businesses that even had been running well for many years in a row could no longer survive. And we're starting to see even those businesses close 12 months into the pandemic. Whereas here in Sydney, we've noticed something very, very different. In Sydney, what you noticed was the geography of where you were located is what affected whether you stayed open or not. So the very, very beginning of the pandemic, zombie businesses closed, except if you were located in a suburban location. And that was because in the CBD area or the downtown area where most businesses, corporate businesses were located, a lot of cafes that were doing really, really well, like 150 kilos of coffee in espresso a week, went out of business in the matter of days once the pandemic hit. And we found that people were working from home and suburban cafes started to boom. And so the geography of where you were located is what determined whether you thrived or you closed in Sydney. And I got to say, folks, being in Sydney has been quite the mind spin because it's business as usual. You'd think you were in 2019, seeing the way that the world works here in Sydney. Cafes are open. People are sitting in cafes. They're crowded. Restaurants are open. The only place you need to wear a face mask is on public transport. But other than that, it's pretty much business as usual. Baristas in shops at the time of recording this do not have to wear a face covering of any kind, a mask or anything like that. It's quite strange having come from the US, but that's how it is. Now, the one thing, even those two communities are very different. The US and Australia are very different in the way that they have had to respond to the pandemic as a coffee industry. The one thing that has proven true for both coffee industries, and that is that those who pivoted and adapted and broke the mold of what was expected of them from being a normal business, those are the businesses that have thrived through the pandemic. And we're going to be looking at some examples of that in future episodes of the Daily Coffee Pro. But what we found is that people who focused on what the consumer wanted and adapting to that as quickly as possible were the people who fared most successful from the pandemic and were able to keep their doors open, whether that was in the US, whether that was in the Middle East, Europe, Australia, Asia, anywhere, Central and South America. We found that people, even coffee producers, who found that parts of their crops were not able to be sold because of not being able to logistically get their crops to market. These were diversified crops, not so much coffee. They found ways to repurpose those crops with regards to their coffee production and have come up with some fantastic processing methods that they've been able to develop through the pandemic and really elevate their offerings, which is so exciting, so exciting. So what is it that we can take away from this as we look at how we're going to approach 2021? Again, we come back to this brand theme for 2021, build the life you choose. And at the center of that is asking yourself the question, what do I want? And those people who are staying focused on what it is they want out of their career and figuring out how they can break the mold of how things have been done in the past so that they can continue to adapt and pivot as the world continues to change and focus, they are the people who are going to be the most successful and the most, this is more important, the most satisfied in their career and in their business as the times continue to evolve and change as this pandemic progresses and the world starts to figure out the financial and economic consequence of this pandemic. An important part of doing that is finding a match between what it is that you want, what you choose, and finding the customer, if you're in business, or the employer, if you are an employee, who matches that intention. And once you can find and align with that, that is when you're going to be able to build the life, the business, the career that you choose. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that you are starting to see the direction that we're looking to take the content in 2021. This is about you. This is about making sure that we look at the last 12 months and realize that having a life that is just about survival is no longer an option. It is about building something that we want to live and breathe every day, building a career and a business that's profitable, that is fulfilling, that is inspiring and motivating and makes you excited to get out of bed every day to go and grab the opportunities that are ahead of you. We're here to help you achieve that. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.